Chief Data Science Officer, Najat leads a team of over 100 data scientists and data engineers who are leveraging the power of AI, machine learning, and real-world data from end to end across Janssen's pharmaceutical pipeline to do things in pharma R&D that couldn't have been done before. As global head of R&D strategy and operations, Najat shapes Janssen's R&D strategy, including key pipeline and portfolio decisions and new strategic initiatives, all focused on delivering the company's mission of changing the trajectory of healthcare. And prior to being at Janssen, Najat was a partner at BCG, and she was named on Endpoint News' list of top 20 leaders under 40 in biopharma and biotech last year. She received her Ph.D. in organic chemistry from the University of Pennsylvania and completed a BA in computational chemistry with a minor in economics from Colgate University. It's a real pleasure to welcome Najat. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much. Again, it's great to be here. As Tom mentioned, and I just want to set the stage a little bit for everyone. I'm at J&J, our pharma arm, which is Janssen. We cover about 6 therapeutic areas. And one aspect I just want to emphasize is that we have looked at the way data science, which includes AI, machine learning, and digital health, can really impact and is impacting our pipeline for the products that we develop for patients in a unique way. So I head up both data science, which I always say is a team within a large company. It's a team of 100+ data scientists and data engineers. It's a startup in a large company. And I also head up, I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategy and overseeing all of the portfolio and the portfolio management and the decisions contributing to that go with it. Why am I emphasizing that? I think it's really, really important. If data science is going to be something that changes the way we work and think, that is core to our strategy, and there's an intimate understanding of every single program and how we can positively benefit either the probability of success or the pace at which we do things, leveraging these innovative solutions. So it's that integration for us, not just data science for the sake of data science, the integration into our core pipeline, which is the heartbeat and the engine of what we do as a life sciences and pharmaceutical company. That makes us very, very unique. And therefore, the title of my talk you will see is How Data Science is Transforming R&D End to End. So I oversee data science from target identification, which is like, what is driving the disease? What is the true mechanistic definition of the disease? To how do we generate the right medicines, molecules that can someday become a medicine? So this is the chemistry and the discovery. To how do we design our trials in the right ways, executing in the right way, so that we can drive precision medicine for our patients, right medicine at the right patient, for the right patient at the right time. So without further ado, I'll jump into the presentation. I want to first just emphasize the motivation of what we do and why we do it, and it's patients. The founder of Janssen, he has a quote that I think rings and resonates very strongly to all of us at J&J, which is, he always said, Dr. Paul Janssen said, patients are waiting. And I think that evokes a sense of urgency and the sense of service and duty that we have to really remain committed to them. And the whole focus of data science is how can we raise the bar for that innovation, leveraging these new approaches to improve the health and the humanity, health for humanity. So how are we doing this? I mentioned that we take a very unique approach at Janssen, where data science is at the center of how we do all the core aspects of discovering and developing a medicine. So data science is helping us have a deeper understanding of disease expertise, how to invent that molecule that can actually modulate the protein that's either overexpressed, underexpressed, inhibit, whatever we want to do. And also how we not just make a molecule, but actually make sure that it can be a therapeutic down the road, right? So that's around the technology development and scaling the manufacturing. There's a lot of hype in this space, and I hope as I go through these slides, you will see our emphasis is not on what can be, what should be, or any of that. It's focused on hardcore examples of impact. And once we see that impact, we scale. So proof points is what we focus on. When people ask me questions about data science, often I hear, how are you going to do this faster? And I think it's important to emphasize to both those that are in the data science space, to those that are getting into the data science space or learning, or those that just work with data scientists. I would say the primary value driver of data science is really focused on new insights, or confirming insights, validation of insights of things we couldn't do before. And I'll go through some of those examples, but take for a fact that 85% of the targets that exist, are not druggable today with the medicines that we have. So really focusing on that white space. Again, why? Because it improves lives of patients. And then the secondary and important but secondary aspect is really around how can we do things faster, better, enhance patient experience, reduce the burden on healthcare providers, and so forth. So with that context, let's talk about where is data science having impact today, right? So you'll see this wheel in the center. And that's really around the various important segments of, discovery and development in R&D. So let's start with target ID. So this is around, let's put it this way, like a lot of the times the way we categorize or define diseases is not based on the mechanistic underpinning of the disease, but, it's either around the organ where it shows up. So bladder cancer, for instance, or it's around the name of the physician that actually, determined the disease. So, Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. We want to move from that to really understanding the drivers of the disease. Is it a mutation? Is it a pathway? What's being, activated, what's not, and so forth. So we want to get to a more precise definition. And that's where a lot of the multimodal data that's coming up, longitudinal, is really helping us get there. And then the second aspect is molecular invention, and this is close to my heart given my background. Supremely important to predict what that protein structure is in a dynamic state and say what are the molecules, whether small molecules, large molecules, biologics, etc. This is where there's a lot that's going on with generative AI to be able to actually enhance the prediction, reduce the cycle time, improve the probability that we can target novel things that we couldn't do before. The third area that I think you're going to see a lot more of in the next few years is, in other industries, digital twins are something that are commonly used, right? Simulations are done to really optimize the conditions in which you make a therapeutic. I think there's a lot more that we can do there, anything from small molecules, but also to some of the new and innovative modalities like gene therapy, cell therapy. How do you optimize the promoter, the design? How do you optimize, these cell therapies as well in terms of the conditions of manufacturing them and so forth? And then, once we get into development, so fine, you know what's driving the disease, you have a molecule that can tackle it, at least preclinically, you've optimized how you can develop it, but then comes the trials in humans, right? And you want to ensure that you're driving precision medicine. Why is that important? Again, we want to avoid heterogeneous patient populations. You want to be very selective around those populations that will actually respond. So this is where novel endpoints, AI to stratify patients better, and it ties to that mechanistic understanding of the disease. Because if you understand that, then you can break it down and say, which are the patients that I should be targeting? And then leveraging clinical trial data, of course, but also real world data to really solidify what's that unmet need, to solidify, what is the current standard of care and how are patients doing there versus therapy that you're testing, all the way through actually executing on the trials. Some of these trials can take many, many years. So can we flip it around and make it more patient-centric, where we decentralize the parts that we can to reduce patient burden, but then we also set up our sites where you can actually go to areas that are more accessible to patients, where the eligible patients are. We'll go through more with it. And then once you launch the product, if all goes well, we use the real-world data to actually continue our understanding and continue this learning loop that you see here. So let me go through some examples, because I'm always a big believer that examples make all of this much more real. Okay, so let's start with target ID and validation. I won't go through the left side, but I always like to face with, like, where are we today and what are the opportunities? And I think in the opportunities are having more integrated data sets. I mean, I know I probably sound like a broken record, but the more longitudinal data sets that you have, the more you can actually mine them for these insights. And that is getting better. It's never going to be perfect, but it is getting better. So a couple of things. So, J&J is a founding member of the UK Biobank. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it. 500,000 patients, lots of longitudinal data, depth and breadth. There's many more data sets that are also FinGen, Our Future Health. So we are deeply engaged in all of them. What are we doing with that? You have genetic data, great, but now more and more you have proteomic data. So combining the genetic and proteomic data to really better understand the protein-protein network analyses. And we're either identifying or validating, aka adding more conviction to targets, new targets. You see some in neuroscience here for Parkinson's, but there's also others that we're finding in the oncology space as well. And actually, one of the ones in the oncology space is now going to start in human trials early next year. So remember what I said, it's not just, we find something and we sit on it. The beauty of it is you find something, you work with your discovery team to develop the right molecule, and you actually, if you have conviction, you then put it into the clinical engine. This is very important because we all know that the number of novel targets, either to validate or identify, is a huge area of unmet need in neuroscience. It's a huge area of unmet need in oncology, especially in solid tumors. So much of the work starts from here, because if you understand what's driving the disease, then the next part, which is creating the molecule, becomes something that's a much more rational design. So, couple of examples here. I wish I could see everybody, but I'm sure if I asked you to raise your hands in terms of who's heard about generative AI and de novo design, large language models, I'm sure a lot of you would raise your hands. And, it's not just, again, for the sake of it, but, the fact that we can now start to predict a lot of the protein structure, which is a starting point, has been helpful. I will say that there's more work that needs to be done around being able to predict structures in more of a dynamic state versus a snapshot, because that's how our bodies work. And I think it's also really important to realize that some of the aspect of predicting protein design still have some more work to do, like the more flexible loops, being able to really predict well the allosteric sites and so forth. However, we're moving in the right direction. And there's multiple examples. This is just an example from the Baker Lab. There's many examples from others as well, which this is the parathyroid hormone, cyclical peptide, always hard. We're using diffusion models. And let me see if I can turn on the video. Using diffusion models, so actually going backwards, right, to predict what a binder would look like. And this is done in seconds, tested in the lab, pretty good binding affinity. I do want to say, though, that's not where the work ends. That's where the work starts. Because once you know the binding affinity, great. But tell me about all of the other parameters that are needed to actually make it something that can be a therapeutic. So if it's small molecules, it's things like off-target effects. If it's a large molecule, immunogenicity, stability, and so forth. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And that takes me to the right side, which is really around not just finding the binding affinity, but actually going through that and using approaches such as ML-based cell painting to look at many different cell lines and predict toxicity early on using high content imaging. We're doing a lot of this work actually in-house, and of course, partnering. We partner with like 50, 60 different companies and academic institutions. I think that's one of the great things about J&J. Smart idea can come from anywhere. We're very agnostic to that. But I do want to emphasize why this is really important, because if you can improve the probability of success, especially for small molecules where you do have off-target effects, what we're doing is we're actually testing these compounds in various different cell lines, and based on the morphology, leveraging ML can predict when you're testing new compounds, which ones might have toxicity effects once you put it in humans. So it's really improving your probability of success. So I want to just go back to a couple of things. The two examples here, the two examples before. Yes, they help you with cycle time, but the more important piece is you're doing things that you couldn't do before. These are novel insights. Either you're validating them or creating them from scratch. All right. A couple of more examples. So now let's get into this whole business of actually making these molecules once you have them, so they can be molecules or biologics, right? Like I was mentioning before, digital twins are going to be extremely, extremely important for us in terms of increasing the yield of some of these antibodies, just optimizing it. So a couple of examples here. One is around bispecific antibodies. So what we did here was we were looking at all of the various process parameters as to how can we increase the yield, right? And decrease the reaction time significantly. That's very, very important. We looked at all of the parameters, created these digital twins, and looked at what is the best way to optimize it. And the fact that we were actually able to reduce the time is important. But more importantly, we were able to increase the throughput by about 3x. I think that's very important. So we're looking to now scale this in other bispecific areas as well. And then the other is, it's very exciting to see the impact of CAR T, cell therapies, gene therapies, but there's a lot to be done in terms of optimizing it. So we're using single-cell RNA-seq combined with machine learning to really understand who is a responder versus not. How can we optimize these manufacturing processes? The person who heads up CMC for us always reminds me with these biologics, the process is the product and the product is the process. So that's a really important aspect here, where you're understanding what you're creating and how it's interacting with the body, and leveraging some of these experimental data. ML has been a huge area of focus for us. Also understanding why, also the mechanisms of how it's working, not just optimizing manufacturing, but understanding the mechanistic aspects as well. I'm going to keep moving. So we walked through discovery, we went through CMC, now we're starting human trials. I want to emphasize a couple of things that's really important. There are so many diseases in this world, and a lot of them are not diagnosed early enough. And so even if you have the best therapeutics in the market, it's such a tragedy if you can't actually detect the disease early enough. So here's a couple of examples, and we're working with the partners, and you can see the names here, which is PAH. There are therapies in the market. It takes about 3 years before they get diagnosed. People get misdiagnosed. They go through many ECGs. We looked at real-world data, figured out what is one of the earliest procedures that's done. ECG is pretty commonly done. And developing an AI-based, ECG-based AI algorithm, we are actually able to detect it up to 3 years in advance. We have breakthrough device designation from the FDA for this algorithm. AL amyloidosis, similar story. Therapies in the market. People are not diagnosed early enough, can significantly, dramatically improve outcomes if they are. So these are AI algorithms using echo images, very good accuracy. Actually, and I know this is something that is very important, and I know a lot of you know this, but it's important to actually use data sets from different devices, different institutions, US, Europe, Asia. So, the amyloidosis one, I'll take that as an example, actually uses data sets from about 6 different institutions to make sure it's as generalizable as possible. This also has been granted FDA breakthrough device designation. And next step is submission this year and early next year with approval after that. We're working with device companies in order to ensure that these can be deployed. So what would it mean? A physician is doing an ECG, it would pop up that this person might be detected of having XYZ disease. So that prompts the physician, the primary care or the specialty care physician, to actually do the confirmatory test to reduce that diagnostic gap. Let me see if the video might work here. So a couple of other examples. We are also looking at other data modalities such as H&E images, histopathology, digitized. Similar thing, FGFR. There are therapies in the market, but low digit percentages of patients, at least under than 20%, the last time I checked, are being sequenced. And a same thing. How do we reduce the diagnostic gap? So we've actually developed an AI algorithm, which is being deployed in trial sites. It's not just an idea, where you can see it's actually picking up those green spots. It's actually picking up where the AI algorithm is picking up that somebody has this certain mutation. So you can actually predict the mutation. I think the video is a bit wonky today because I'm online, but you can actually predict the mutation from the histopathology image. And to make it explainable, we've actually worked with pathologists to highlight where it's picking it up. So those are the green shots. I don't know why this thing is coming up. There's more examples, just in the interest of time, also around, I'm just going to keep going, also around IBD. So for instance, let's now move from precision oncology to immunology. Today, most of the therapies for IBD, the responder population is small, about a third. And one of the reasons for that is we need just more sensitive and objective digital endpoints. So what you will see here is the current state. So current state is you do a whole endoscopy, and then you get one score for the entire intestine, right? So for instance, if you have 5 flares, it scores based on the most severe one. So if somebody has one very severe flare and somebody has 10, they get the same score. It's not very sensitive. So what we've done is created this novel endpoint that actually does a score for every single frame. And there's like so much data generated for every endoscopy, thousands and thousands of frames, can give you a much more accurate estimation. Why is that important? So that when you're in the trial, you can really clearly delineate who's responding versus not, much more accurately than we can do today. So you can see over here, MES1, the higher the score, the more there's disease. So you can see for every single image, for every single location as it's going through the frame, it's showing where it's healthy, it's showing where it's not healthy. See MES2, where it's less healthy. You have more flares, MES1, a little bit less, so forth. So it makes it much, much more sensitive. We're actually working on, with the FDA and other regulators, going back and forth on the elements that are needed, and we want to actually leverage this for one of our upcoming UC trials. Neuroscience, another area that's notorious for very heterogeneous population. One thing that we're working on, and there's multiple examples with our tau programs, is actually using digital endpoints as more quantitative markers of screening. So just understanding who might actually have depression, or similarly for Alzheimer's. So, actually from speech, we have developed algorithms, and these are actually generative AI algorithms that can detect what is the likelihood that somebody actually has depression or something else. If we're looking for Alzheimer's, we also have other, I would say, augmented reality leveraging tools that we've also partnered on that can measure your gait. This is all patient consented, your ability to recall, which is really important for Alzheimer's disease as well. I'm just going to go through this a little bit more quickly in the interest of time. Next step is, okay, so fine, you have great endpoints, but what about the evidence generation? So we're trying to be very, very holistic on evidence generation. You'll see Talway, which was just approved. It's a single-arm study by specific redirector, beautiful data, great for patients. We also wanted to ensure that we had a comparative study, like, standard of care. We used a prospective real-world study, capturing the same elements, but based on the standard of care. So then you can actually compare how the patients are doing in the real world versus those in our trial. So this was part of our regulatory submissions as well. I do think that's very important to actually have as much holistic data generation. And that was just an example for an ECA, but there's also examples just for unmet need, understanding who in the real world is most at need for certain therapies. So we're doing a lot of that work as well as supplemental information in our regulatory submissions. Trial acceleration. So remember, I mean, gone are the days where we do it based on qualitative understanding. We're layering on quantitative understanding as well. So I'll just turn on this video. But essentially what we do is we have proprietary ML algorithms, data from so many different, you can see sources, real world, prior trial sites, and we're leveraging it. We have this platform called Trials360.ai for site feasibility, ranking which sites based on these predictions from the ML algorithm we should be leveraging. Site engagement, really important to understand real time. You know, what do our sites need? How are we tracking? Where are we actually recruiting patients? And the real-time actionable insights. So you can actually see like which sites do we continue? Where do we need to do? Where do we need to do less? End-to-end solution, not just used by data scientists, our operations people, our CROs, our clinicians, even our commercial colleagues can see. So it also provides transparency, so you're operationally as tight as possible in what you want to deliver. There's examples, and these are even outdated by the time I'm going through this, but where we have had 1.5x increase in recruitment by going to the right places where the eligible patients are and using this transparency and real-time understanding to improve our trial performance. We also have algorithms specifically to over-index on our diversity goal, very, very important for us, where we have actually recruited 5 months in advance. And the examples keep on coming. So we're actually doing this across 50 different programs. So talk to you about some proof points. We have over 50, 60 examples of impact. So I could spend many more hours, and I'm very grateful to the team that makes it happen. But I want to talk about what are the foundational aspects that make this real. One is, yes, you can have over 100 projects, but it's one of our, I would say, secret of success is Met.ai. This is our platform, end-to-end data science platform. So I'll talk a little bit more around it. We have now actually we already have 10,000 users. This is already outdated, but all of our data sets from discovery, development, real world data is in one place. The algorithms are developed. All of them are stored in one area with full audit of how they're being developed and so forth, and submissions that we do for FDA. Then on top of that is the applications. So you saw Trials360.ai. We have many, many applications. I don't think I have a slide in here, unfortunately. But the whole aspect is it's not a data lake, because sometimes people think, oh, you know, if you have a data lake, everything's solved. A data lake means you just take all your stuff and you dump it in one place. That is not usable. So it's really important to get all the data, yes, link it, annotate it. I mean, my team spends like 60, 70% of the time just data engineering. That's the really important stuff. Is there bias in the data sets? Is it generalizable? Why is it not? And then having algorithms all in one place that it allows us to scale and use some of the algorithms developed from one use case to another, right? And also test the algorithm performance. It also is a great place for us to connect with our collaborators. And then the applications is how you decentralize it. So it's used not just by data scientists, but to solve the various questions that I mentioned across the portfolio. When people ask me about, you know, taking a data science team that was nascent to, you know, one of the leading data science teams in industry right now in under 3 years, you know, I always call it as a labor of love. Love, because you can probably see, hopefully you can sense it through my energy, that I love the fact that we have the privilege to collaborate with such great leaders in the company to usher in a new era of discovering and developing medicines. It helps the patients. And that's the core motivation I have. And I think for a lot of us that are probably listening or engaging today. But there's also a part of it that's labor. And what do I mean by that? Is, you know, bringing two disciplines together that speak a different language, that come from different generations, that could be viewed as being disruptive and threatening. What's going to happen to my job? It's not for the faint of heart. And it helps to have, really strong leadership from the top. Our CEO, Joaquin Duato, has said, the next 10 years, we're going to see more innovation in healthcare than we've seen in the past 100 years. And one component of that is really data science and AI, machine learning, generative AI, all of the changes that's happening. We just have to do it in the right way. So it's not just important to try, but we have to try it in a responsible way. But that means it's a huge cultural and mindset shift that needs to happen. And it's really, really important for me personally, for my team, that they're equal and co-partners in this journey together, because that's how you ensure you have the right input that's coming in at the right time, and not just coming in, but incorporated. So we actually have data scientists as part of the clinical development team, super, super important, as part of the core team. So we're one team, we're truly integrating this as to how we think and work. I can't say enough about our external collaborators. A lot of the core innovation is being done by the companies integrating all these data sets, new algorithms, our academic partners that are, pushing the boundaries, and to have the privilege to work with them and apply it to areas that can make a difference is, it's something I'm very grateful for. So I want to close by saying, look, there's so much more to do. We're just on the surface. We need to stay focused. Again, it's not about data science. It's not about science. Please, my one ask is, let's not make it about me. Let's make it about the collective we, which is how do we work together to create these medicines for patients? Our success rate in industry, just broadly, for making medicines, whether it's biotech, pharma, whoever, we can do better. And our patients deserve that, and we owe it to them. So with that, thank you so much for your time. I will stop sharing, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you ever so much, Dr. Khan. I think I speak on everybody's behalf in saying that was a really inspiring and exciting lecture. Actually, your enthusiasm is infectious, even over Zoom. I think there's plenty of time now for questions, and I thought I'm going to start with one, if that's all right. That I don't mean it to be too provocative, but I'm interested in this. As a kind of public health doctor, when you talk about increasing the precision, let's say, and I agree fully that our classification of diseases is relatively arbitrary and is definitely not modern. So let's say we were going to use more molecular markers, etc., to decide that this is a subgroup of diabetes or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or whatever. And then, but in the same breath, at the very end of the talk, you touched on that issue, which is that our success rate is low because these problems are hard, and of course that means that I'm kind of interested in your perspective on costs and how sustainable some of this is, because I suppose in the old days, if you got a blockbuster drug, you targeted everybody who had a heart disease, or everybody with heart failure would get one drug. So it's a much broader population in whom you can actually have your reimbursement. Whereas if you're talking about very small subgroups, but you're probably still going to have a relatively similar failure rate, you've got a smaller pool of people in whom you can sell your products. And I wondered what your implications are as a result for precision medicine on kind of affordability, given that we know that this is a real struggle. And do you think that data science will be able to help with some of that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Listen, maybe let me take a step back and just explain one thing. So you mentioned we used to have blockbuster drugs and they go for a broader population, right? But how long do the patients stay on it? Not for long. And the reason is because they're not seeing the benefit, right? I mean, it's not right for the patients, but even if you think from a commercial perspective, right, the adherence rate is low. People tend to stick to things that work. So that's point number one. Point number two, let's just take the revolution in obesity that's happening right now, right? Another prevalent disease that hasn't been effectively tackled in decades. I can share a list of many, many other diseases right? That we don't have therapeutics for today. So if you look at the full pie, it's not like there's a fixed pie and then you're trying to make changes within it. I think you have to look at it longitudinally from a patient's perspective. If you have broad therapies that only a third even respond to, a lot of the other 2/3 don't stay on it because it's not helping them. Then there's the aspect of there's new diseases that we can't even tackle today at all. Like 85% of the targets that we know drive diseases don't have therapies that can address it. The way you go about it is to do the right thing, which is you have drugs that work for patients that matter. Just because you're targeted, let's take that as an example. Let's take breast cancer. You have BRCA1, BRCA2, you have HER2 positive, HER2 negative. There's a whole regimen, and it's all targeted, but it's focusing on the different slices of the patients. What I would love to see, 5 years, whatever the time you might be using data sciences, we understand and target and make medicines not just for one slice of the patient population, but we actually understand all of the other slices, and we're developing therapeutics for that. So then you are capturing the whole, but with more targeted therapies that work better for them, and then they will stay on to have sustained improvement in outcomes. Now, I want to make a second point, which is around the sustainability of the cost and the failure rate. It is challenging. So that's why I said in the very beginning, the focus is how do we improve the probability of success and speed? But that probability of success is probably the primary. And how do you do that, right? You try to have therapies that don't fail in trials because you're actually predicting the tox in advance. You do the best that you can. Then, redefining diseases, so we go after the mechanistic aspects. The other thing is, if you look at it, 60-70% of the expenditures is actually in clinical trials. It takes a long time to recruit patients. We know that only 4% of the patients that are eligible get in a trial. That's where AI can have a huge role in terms of going to where the patients are, accelerating that rate for two reasons. One, time acceleration is important, but you're getting those therapies to patients faster. That's really important. So the way to capture it, there's a lot of room for improvement. I don't think it's a binary, right? If you have more precision medicine therapies, you can tackle all of the different segments, but in the right way that matters for them. And then the third thing I would say is the value of data science is not just to do it in one aspect of R&D. You want to do it end to end because the value actually compounds over time. If you save me 3 months in discovery, well, we take 3 more years to recruit. That's not the value add for the patients. You got to do it across the board.
Thank you ever so much, Farah. I won't hog any more. I'm going to hand over to Andreas to field all the rest of the questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. Yes, let's start straight away. Krina, you had a question. If you would like to ask it.
Yes, thanks for the fascinating talk today. It was very inspiring. And it's related with the digital twin you mentioned. I'm curious to know if you developed digital twins for other organs or diseases, and how long it took to get the approval from FDA for the AI algorithm.
Okay, so there's 2 questions. One is on digital twin and one is on the AI algorithm. I'll start with the AI algorithm. So for instance, for the ECHO one, for the AL amyloidosis one that I just mentioned, that one we started, I would say, a couple of years ago. The initial work was really around a proof of concept, right? With one institution, we looked at, is there a signal to noise there? Can you actually predict it earlier? And once we did, we worked with our partner, Ultromics, to actually partner with 4 or 5 different institutions just to make it more generalizable using different devices. You know, the great thing about the FDA is they have a lot of pre-specification meetings. So it's been a journey with the FDA from the very start, you know, as we get initial data, just showing what are the data elements, what would be needed. It's very iterative. So yeah, it's about 2 years, and we're going to be submitting it this fall, and, you know, knock on wood, approval for next year. So again, the thing I want to emphasize more than the time is the quality and rigor of the work that needs to be done to make sure that, you know, these algorithms are really, really generalizable. And there's always going to be some limitation. I mean, for those that are machine learning folks in this call, you're never going to have the perfect data set. So I think transparency is extremely important. Now, to answer your second question around digital twins, For the digital twins and CMC, there's a lot of internal data. So imagine every experiment that we're doing, there's a ton of data that's being developed. So that was under a year of just taking that data, cleaning it up, developing the algorithm and testing it, real time as we're developing these, and then changing the parameters to see, are we getting better yield? I think that's one aspect that's really nice if you're in a biotech or a pharma company, etc., where you're doing things end to end, because you can do the algorithms and really test it quite quickly. I make it sound a little bit easy, but that's where the cultural element and the buy-in is also important. People don't always want to do it. So working with the various leaders to do that is important. I hope that answered your two questions.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your question, Tina.
Thank
We have the next question from Yoon. Yoon? Oh,
yeah.
Hi.
Hi. Can I use the platform for any disease?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Prior 3660 AI, the platform you mentioned.
Yeah, trials360.ai. Yep, go ahead.
Is it available for any disease?
We use it for across all different diseases. The data sets that we feed into it are more population level. So yeah, there are assets. You could do it for many different diseases. I will say that we customize it then for every disease, because yes, you probably know, depending on which disease you're looking at, you might need more data sets that are more niche. Let's say if you're looking at oncology in a certain area. So we partner with various companies to augment that.
So if there's someone who want to use or like experimenting or like research for that, then the person need to bring the data or to use that platform.
It is an internal platform that we have. So the data is developed, everything by the data science team internally. So we license additional data sets, we partner as needed, but it is an internal solution.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Hisu.
Go ahead.
Who's asking, how do we access the Trials360 AI platform? So, yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask if we had free access to the Trials360 platform or if it required any subscriptions to the platform.
Yeah, it's an internal platform for J&J. So if you come join the team, you can have full access to it. Just kidding. But yes, it's an internal tool for now. And it was really built, out of, we have over 100 trials that are ongoing at any one point in time. So to be able to do it the right way at scale is why it was developed. But it has data sets from various partners that we have licensed.
Thank you. Maximilian, you're already waiting there for your question.
Yeah, thanks. First, thanks for the very great talk. I really liked the framework and the very specific examples. Made it very tangible how you drive data science at J&J. So my question is on the strategic side. So I'd be interested to know how you perceive the integration of those data science discussions, those more strategic ones, into the classical strategy discussions. If this is something that you do fully integrated already, or if it's still separate, and if there are any data points that help you drive those discussions, if you can disclose about that.
Yeah. It's a great question. Remember I said labor of love? That's where all my labor comes from. Well, listen, I think in order to, so let me take a step back. AI can be used in so many different ways, and you have to really be thoughtful about where you leverage it. And for that, it has to be done in partnership, right? You have to align on the strategy with, the oncology person or the ClinOps person or whatever it might be. Now, and I also head up all of strategy and portfolio, so I have a pretty good vantage point of what those priorities are. I do think it's important for the data scientists to be bilingual, which means, they're AI experts first, but they understand biology, chemistry. Because what happens, I've seen initially, is the data scientist might have an idea, and then the clinician or the operations person will say, no, we've done it, or no, it won't work. So the knee-jerk reaction usually is, we're good. So understanding, like I always say, put yourself in the shoes of the other person, like really understand their area, because then you can anticipate and say, totally understand. I was just thinking this area might be helpful if we worked on, because then we could predict toxicity for X, Y, and Z better, because that's a challenge you've had, right? And then you start having a more constructive conversation. So part of it is, as a data scientist, being broader and understanding the domain you're in. Because I think where we will fail as an industry is if data scientists are perceived as like service providers. That's not it at all. They have to be equal partners in the strategy and the execution and the pull through. The other aspect is also, it's really important that there's a mindset shift. You have to have people that are open-minded, but a lot of the times, folks tend to worry about what's going to happen to their, jobs and so forth. So I always say it's, a clinician won't be replaced by an AI algorithm. A clinician will be replaced by a clinician who knows how to use an AI algorithm. So it's good for them to learn really quickly, and vice versa, and partner together. Listen, culture is an ongoing labor of love, but really worth it, because that's how you get a company to that next level. The last thing I'll say is, very tactically, it's important to have the data scientists be also part of the decision-making. It's important that they're part of the team, because, inclusion is very important. You don't want to bring the data scientists at the end, then they have no idea about the strategy, and they're just trying to do a rescue effort. They need to be partners from the very get-go.
Thanks, very interesting.
Thank you, Maximilian. There's a question from Renan.
Yes, hello Najat, thank you for the presentation. I would like to dig a little more deep into the previous answer. Can you develop a little more on the organizational aspects of your organization, meaning the teams that build all of those solutions, because you have different kinds of maturity in terms of projects, POCs, and you have projects that are going to be deployed into production. How do you deal if you have data science on IT side, R&D side, and especially how do you deal with those to communicate better with doctor clinicians and the final users of the machine learning solution?
Renan, can I ask you what's your background?
Yes,
so those are excellent questions.
Yes, I'm a lead data scientist at a pharma company.
At a pharma company.
Yes.
No wonder you're asking that excellent question. Yes, I'm happy to answer. So here's, so we have done it a little bit differently. So we have one data science team in R&D, and it's a data science function that reports into the executive vice president, EC level of pharma R&D. There's one team. That team has all your data scientists, all your data engineers. So the platforms are built by us tightly with the data scientists. Data scientists, they go back and forth because, as you know, that's super important. We have the strategists in that group too. Those that are maybe an oncologist but understand data science, because you have to be able to interpret what are the questions you want to answer. We have all of the RWE folks in one group. So they're all in one group. And I think that's not how, when I first started, there were data scientists in many different areas. I think it's extremely challenging, because then you don't have one vision, one strategy to go after. You also end up seeing variability in terms of algorithms and performance. So there's a lot of duplication that happens. And I always say, if you hire, you can hire, but you will only keep your best talent if they are fully empowered and they have their clear roles and responsibilities. Duplication is one of the worst ways to lose your best people. So it took a big cultural change to have one function, and it's an equal function to operations, to discovery, to oncology. With our own budget, that was also very important, because I always say a startup company or any company does not start with no funding. Because if you have to ask permission, then by the time they see the value, you're late. Our role is to see what's around the corner, right? And partner. So that autonomy is really important. And I think the number three, you mentioned about IT. IT is a central outside of R&D group, but we partner very closely on, our cloud and infrastructure, but the roles and responsibilities are very clear as to what this team does versus the other team. And, having data scientists be in the discovery, like in the cross-functional team, in the clinical cross-functional team, and having them be a core member, I just achieved that 2 months ago. Very important, right? Because you don't want to feel like an outsider. You want to feel like part of one team. And listen, our head of R&D, John Reed, EVP of R&D, John Reed, our CEO, as I mentioned, they really emphasize the importance of AI and data science. So, it gets visibility at the board level. We just, we share the examples. Now, there are some naysayers, Renan, as you know, there are going to be some very senior leaders who think, it's just that's just part of change. I always say to my team, put your head down, be resilient, let your work do the talking, and the rest will take care of itself. If we are truly an open-minded and innovative organization, that should be happening. And that's my role, to make sure I'm highlighting the importance of what they're doing. I don't know if that helps, but just wanted to be a bit more tangible on what we're doing.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this long explanation. Really helpful. What's the next? Kari, if you would like to ask a question. No, I will just do it for you. The question is regarding collaborating in discovery. What are some ways we could help advance open source tools and research to enable more participation and progress in that area?
Yeah, I have a few examples there. Like if you talk about research tools, all these generative AI algorithms that are being developed, and basically most of it is based on PDB, database. Can we actually leverage, federated learning approach or some other approach, some more of the algorithms that are generated by biotechs, by industry? So in a pre-competitive way, we're trying to work on that to actually enhance the performance of some of these algorithms. The other could also be, just having a pre-competitive team that looks at taking some of these, really, really big targets that we haven't, as the whole world, made progress on, and developing, leveraging cryo-EM, developing the crystal structures, really trying to hone in and refine with simulation so that you have the dynamic nature encapsulated, the predictions as well. That would move the organizations quite far. I think everybody quite far. I would love to see more of that happening. It's always a challenge, with data sharing and so forth, but there are discussions ongoing. I think about it in a similar way with UK Biobank and some of these longitudinal data sets that are really helping us elucidate better understanding of disease. Again, that started with 3-4 pharma companies that were founding members. We were one of them, but then it's added, and you see some of the work, we're publishing the proteomic data. Actually, the lead author on that is somebody from my team. In the next month, it's a Nature paper, but you see like 10 other pharma companies are there, but those insights and that being made public and academic institutions are driving, I would love to see more of that in the research space. I'd be happy if we had a UK Biobank version in the US, quite frankly, in Europe too. There's so much diversity and the kind of folks that we have. So yeah, there's a lot to be done. And also I would say the other piece is around AI and ethics. I think many people have different viewpoints on it, but I would love to converge to something that's more used, sort of an industry standard across. I co-chair this industry consortium, pre-competitive for data science leaders, called Disrupt, and that is one of the areas we're looking into in terms of how can we have a more standardize some of these practices. The list goes on, whoever asked the question, but also trying to be practical of what can really make a difference. So I think on the target ID side, these longitudinal data sets is a great start, really trying to push on some of the pre-competitive work around algorithms for protein ligand prediction, rank scoring, and so forth.
Maybe a follow-up to that from myself on that. Do you have like some sort of an AI ethics task force in your company that like works on that internally?
Yes. So one thing I didn't mention, I also co-chair the J&J Data Science Council. So that looks across not just pharma, medtech, and all of our other various areas. And you'll see, hopefully in the fall, we're going to publish our position on AI and ethics. Internally, we also have a team, cross-functional team, that's what are the best practices and ensuring that we're using them in a consistent way.
Thank you very much. And the next question comes from Dosti.
Thank you for the presentation. I just have a question about the speech analyze model. It is a multilingual model, or it is working only on English, or what other data sets used for the training the model?
Yeah, great question. We're actually using it for, I think, 5 languages now. English, we first started just to try to validate it, make it better. It's interesting, what we do is we also generate, this is using generative AI, like, linguistic patterns that the model learns on, and then we validate and train that further with actual screening participants. We've actually found that to be quite useful. In some of the more advanced versions, we are actually leveraging that with text patterns as well, so speech and text. And some of the parameters that are being most useful is the tonality of the voice, searching for words. We're also picking up certain parameters that are more correlated with having, let's say, you're going to have a depression relapse, or you're going to have, you might progress to Alzheimer's and so forth. So right now, not in all of the languages that I would like, but I'm just trying to be practical, that we take a few and get it right, and then we scale.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dosti.
We have a question from Nan. You can't put up the mic right now.
How much of a role would you say internal culture of an institution plays in ensuring representation in patient-centric R&D? To your knowledge, has anyone been able to quantify this impact? I don't know if anybody has been able to quantify the impact, but I will say there's a lot of studies that talk about, that are quantified. You can see in Harvard Business Review and others, where if you have more representation and diversity at the senior levels all the way down, you have those companies have better outcomes, from a just overarching company perspective. There's many, I can't remember the latest stat, but there's many studies that mention that. I can answer the question quantitatively, which is my team is almost 50% women. In data science, that's not usually that high. The benchmarks are 16% the last time I checked. And I have folks from about 30 different countries. It's a very multicultural team. And one of my points of pride, because I think it encourages us to think in a more representative way. Like, we're thinking about data sets in Brazil and understanding the local and the global aspect of different countries is extremely important. But as much as representation matters, inclusion matters even more, I would say, because it's not just important to be around the table if you can't speak up and your opinions aren't taken into consideration. And I think that's a journey that we're all going through, especially with data science, because it can sometimes be perceived as a little bit threatening and what would happen. And not that different, the age of computers when that started. I was pretty young then, but still I remember it was people were fearful, but now it's become, we can't even imagine being without a computer, right? Like, so same thing back in the day with steam engines, and the transition there. So I think we're lucky to be in the age where we are. It just requires a lot of resilience to get through it.
Thank you very much. Another question we have from Anna, if you'd like to pose it yourself.
Yes, let's see, Anna. Anna is on. Anna, why don't you ask your question?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your talk. This is really inspiring. So I'm going to slightly a bit more technical question here, but
Yeah.
I was wondering, you mentioned earlier in your talk that you're using single cell data along with machine learning to predict outcomes and do that kind of work. And I was wondering, because I'm working a lot with single cell and RNA-seq, bulk RNA-seq, and I know that often the problem is that the single cell data set, the sample sizes are small. So is that like, how big are the data sets that you're using, and is it like a limitation to like use machine learning in like data sets that have small sample size?
Yeah, so here's what I would say. There's never enough data, but like, for instance, for some of this, what we did is we took the data that we have in our clinical trials. I would say that's about 70, 80 patients. But if you multiply that from a volume perspective, because you have single cell from like before they got the therapy, after they got the therapy. So, I mean, the data set was pretty okay. What we're doing now is augmenting that, some of the initial findings with additional data now that the product is commercialized. But the whole point is you can do it for N of 7, but N of 60, 70, 80 gets you to a decent place for that to happen. One big picture, I love your perspective, is when I look at single cell RNA-seq data, there is no like high volume, standardized, commercialized way of doing that yet. Like, how you have genomics, we don't have that yet, or even for proteomics. So there's also a little bit of a rate limiting step. But what we are trying to find is directionally, what are these biomarkers that lead to better response? But like, they're directional. It doesn't have to be like, the intervals are a little bit broader than I would like in my analysis, but at least it directionally gives you a cue. So that's what we're trying to pick up. But I'm hopeful, as this becomes more part and parcel of how we do our work, that these data sets will get larger as well. But from an ML perspective, it's actually sufficient, because the amount of data points that we have, it's quite good even for each sample, and we have before and after. So far, so good.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Husu, you have another question if you'd like to come back. There you are. Again, your microphone, if you just flip it.
Sorry. It was really just to ask if you had any obstetric or maternity projects on your portfolio, because I was mentioning earlier that often as a specialty, we're neglected in terms of research and advances in medicines and therapeutics and all aspects of that side of life. So it'd be interesting to hear what was on Janssen's radar, so to speak.
It's not only on our radar, we actually have assets in our pipeline focused on maternity and autoantibody diseases that happen during and after maternity. So WAHA, for instance, HDFN, these are very rare maternal fetal diseases, not even just maternal. And we're using our nipocalimab. You can look at that. I can type that asset, but it's focused on our FcRn. It's FcRn focused. Hold on, let me. So if you go there, you can actually see there's multiple programs that we have in phase 2 and starting phase 3. So these are not early stage, and we're actually leveraging data science there, to understand what is the unmet need. So to your point, it can sometimes be neglected. So what is that mortality rate of the fetus, when you have these diseases? So leveraging real world data to really understand that as part of an education, and also to all of our stakeholders, regulators, and others. We are also using ML to be able to find the patients. These are rare diseases, so they're harder to find, and the trials can take longer. We are also using retrospective chart reviews to really understand the current standard of care and what's the outcomes for that. So end to end, we're using a lot of real world data.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions for Dr. Khan? There is just one coming up from Sridham, if you would like to ask it.
I'm just reading the question still. How much of the collected data is needed to make a diagnosis, and is it enough to just store a summary instead of collected samples? Do you want to just ask the question directly? I just have a couple of clarifying comments.
Sorry, I was just getting my mic set up. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've just got my laptop lid closed, so I can't really use the webcam. But I kind of approach things from a more, I guess you could say, interdisciplinary approach, where it's combining efficient ML techniques with deployment in healthcare. And I was just wondering, you mentioned that each patient has a lot of data that they produce. And I was just wondering, for a diagnosis, how much of it do you actually require? And I know that some of these clinics where data collection happens, they store literally everything for archival. And some of that archival storage is quite expensive. And if an ML model can somehow summarize said information, it could cut down on the costs on that end. And the other question was about, how important is it to have ML systems being, I guess, in a way, really lightweight to provide fast, possibly even real-time diagnosis for clinicians?
Okay, I will start by answering the second question first. How important is it for systems to have the ability to provide? Very important, right? Because here's what happens. Let's take the PH example. In the PH example, as an example, what happens is a patient goes to a primary care doctor, right? And what we've seen is they end up being misdiagnosed for 4 years, and they go through 7, 8 ECGs at least, and many, many other, procedures. And often the patient stops coming back because they're like, okay, clearly you don't know what's going on.
Yep.
And what you want is something, like you were saying, lightweight, but easily embedded into the workflow that doesn't require extra cost for the healthcare providers. So it's not a hardware machine or anything that you're adding, but something that is also very easy to use and just flashes, when they're doing it. So that's why, for us, it was important to have an algorithm that's, of course, software, cloud-based, all that good stuff, but that can be regularly updated. And we're working with the GEs and others of the world that can be easily deployed in devices that already exist. So you lower the barrier, right, to that. So it's part of it is technically, but part of it is also how do you integrate it seamlessly into the workflow, right? Because HCPs are so overwhelmed right now, with everything that's going on. And what helps on top of that, especially in the US, is if these things can be reimbursed. So just very practically, right, if they're reimbursed, they tend to get used more. These companies, as I mentioned, are actually seeking reimbursement. And why would these things want to be reimbursed? Because if you do it earlier, you actually reduce the cost of care and improve outcomes down the line. So this is why I always think about data science, not just data science. It's like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And then there's like a strategic element, a clinical, a data science, a commercial, access, policy, regulatory. So all of those things tied together.
Sure.
And then the first part, I'm just going up with your question, how much of the collected data is really needed to make a diagnosis? It's more around what part of the data is needed. So again, if I go back to that example, the real world data of the patient's journey is a really good way of understanding how much of an issue is this, what is the diagnostic gap, what are the procedures they get? Like that's what you use to answer that first question, right? What do you want to design in the beginning? And then for the AI algorithms, like, I'll be honest, the higher the volume of the data set, the better. We have thousands and thousands. We have over like 6 million data points, ECG data points that we leverage. But it actually is more important that you don't get it from only the ECGs made by Philips or by GE, and those are the two market leaders.
Right.
But you also want it for institutions in the US and Europe and others. So it's not, do you need every single data point? No. Do we even have every single data point? I wish. No. But it's being strategic about what aspects help you train a very generalizable algorithm.
Sure. Okay.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for the questions. Thank you for having me. You're going to say something?
Yeah, just saying that this is all the time we have today, and I just would like to thank you very much for your talk and for all the questions you've answered. Really, really great to have you. And yeah, I hope we see you very soon again at CCAIM.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for all the great questions. And for everybody, you know, it's great to see that you're so engaged. And I always say we need all aspects to work and evolve for data science and the impact of it to be truly, you know, see the light of the day that we wanted to see. So thank you again. Thank you, Tom, for having me. And I wish you all good evening, good afternoon. And for those, if any on the West Coast, good morning. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Najat.